Hello. Today is the 1st of May 2023, and we'll talk about an engaging subject for our time, architecture and plans. But the reason I chose to talk about this today is the following one. On this day, the 1st of May, 1753, this book was published in Sweden, and I will read a little bit about it. Species plantarum, I'm not sure I write well the species of plants, but in Latin, species plantarum, I guess. The species of plants is a book by Carl Linnaeus, a very important name in this field, originally published in 1753, which lists every species of plant known at the time, classified into genera. It is the first work to consistently apply binomial names and was the starting point for the name of plants. Species plantarum was published on May 1st, 1753, and this is the reason we talk about it today, by Laurentius Salvius in Stockholm. That was his name, or I'm not sure. This is maybe the name of the publisher. Sorry, the author is Carl Linnaeus, but I imagine Laurentius Salvius was but with a Latin name, in Stockholm in 2 volumes. A second edition was published in 1762, 1763, and a third edition in 1764, although this scarcely differed from the second. Further editions were published after Linnaeus' death in 1778 under the direction of, Karl Ludwig, the director of the Berlin Botanical Garden. And the 5th edition was published in 4 volumes in 1800s. What is interesting that until Linnaeus, the plants were not, apparently they were not named. I mean, they were named, but in this way. Like, for example, this plant was called like this. This plant was referred to as Plantago follis ovato lanceolatis pubescentibus spica cylindrica scapo tereti. And Linnaeus renamed it Plantago media. So until him, the plants didn't really have a name. It was, a rather complex text that describes several attributes of the plants. So with Linnaeus in the 18th century, we started to name plants. Now, in what way is this important? I think it is important because on one hand, we took control of nature. Well, we did this in several ways, but of the world of plants, by naming precisely each plant, we began to control those plants. And it is almost the sarcasm of fate that today, on the 1st of May, is also the International Day of the Workers, or of work. So through work, the human being began to control nature, and architecture, of course, has an important say in this process of emancipation of man from nature. But now there is a lot of interest in coming back to nature, in coming back to the world of plants, so much so that this book was published recently, Hortitecture. It was me who divided the word hortitecture in green and red, the power of architecture and plants. Now, this book would not have been conceivable, in the near past, and even less in the remote past. It is a phenomenon of today that we need plants, we need ozone, we need the world of the vegetable world. We need the world of the plants in order to survive. But architecture is trying its best to sabotage this in a way. And it's very, very hard to continue to work, to build, and at the same time to respect the world of nature and the world of plants. It's very difficult because through its very nature, architecture is against nature. Even Frank Lloyd Wright, with his advocating the marriage between architecture and nature, the truth of the matter is he rather provoked nature. I mean, the falling water, Frank Lloyd Wright placed the building just above the falling water. So the fire of man, and not accidentally for Frank Lloyd Wright, fire was always at the center of the house. So by placing the building, the house, literally above the falling water, he placed man above nature. That's what he did, literally. Although he claimed that, you know, one should always study nature, that nature would never let you down and you can learn a lot from nature and so on. But the conflict between man and nature is as long as the history of man. And Frank Lloyd Wright was not an exception. He had appreciation for nature. He had, I think, even an understanding of nature. But he also had his human ego. And that ego sometimes, maybe often, maybe always, manifested itself very, very strongly. But today, horticulture or horticulture is important, very important for architecture. So much so that I even made a recommendation to the school here to start a department of horticulture within the School of Architecture. And such a department exists already in a School of Architecture like the one in Cincinnati in the United States. They do have a department of horticulture, and they had it for a long time. But this book, Horticulture, The Power of Architecture and Plants, was published by this person. You see his name here, and you can purchase it. Even in our country, you can find it. It's about 180 lei. And this is the cover of the book. Horticulture, The Power of Architecture and Plants. But you see, the plant is green, all right, but the title, the name of the book is written in red, and red stands for fire, not for plants, not for nature. So the eternal conflict between nature and man is still manifest. But I think an architecture that has a longing for some kind of a negotiation with nature is an architecture that perhaps defines our time. We can call it an eco-architecture, we can call it a sustainable architecture, we can call it a green architecture. We can also modify one letter in the word eco, that is the middle letter, C, which could very easily become a G, and then eco-texture becomes an ego-texture. So we have to be careful because architects usually are not very modest, and the very act of building is assertive, is to say the least, is concerned with man. In a way, Alvar Aalto was correct. You know, architecture is built for man. Although there are in the present some architecture offices that seem to be interested more in insects than in human beings. Like, for example, Terform in the United States, in New York. Anyway, I think architecture is going through some crisis now, because how could it continue to be read conceptually and literally, and at the same time to be green? I am seduced by many images of so-called green architecture, but not all of them. And some of them are just plainly demagogical about their so-called greenness. But I like this image. I like this, whatever it is. I don't know what it is. This is an incipient study, and I only show you the introduction to this theme. But, you know, it's also a return to some kind of a primeval architecture where we try to recuperate a past that belonged or we think it belonged to nature. But you know very well, there are many buildings today where the facades, the elevations are covered by green, meaning by plants. It's the return of nature. But as a friend of mine told me, who is a professor of environmental art in San Diego, at the University of San Diego, he said then today is not possible any longer to talk about peace between man and nature. Either man wins or nature wins. A very pessimistic statement, and I'm not sure it's a valid one. I still hope that some kind of a negotiation is possible. But the truth of the matter is that man, meaning the human being, extended himself so much that, I mean, I know that 10% of the entire surface of the United States is covered by asphalt, is covered by concrete, is for parking lots. 10% of the entire surface of the United States, and the situation is almost everywhere in the world now. So if we continue to be, you know, almost diabolically obsessed with driving, because we continuously try to find solutions, so to speak, to pollution. So we invented the electrical car, but the electrical car pollutes itself, because the electricity pollutes, the battery that it uses pollutes, so the parking that it needs pollutes, the roads that it needs pollutes. So unless the human being renounces to many of its great pleasures, I don't think we will diminish the damage that we did to the earth and to nature. Otherwise, you know, I mean, the very idea to bring plants into the Cartesian structure is an intriguing one, you know, because it shows that architects, at least some architects, try to recuperate something that was lost. And it's not just the green per se of the leaves of the plants, but it's also the informal geometry, if I am to use the word geometry. Because in this picture, we see the structure of the house, you know, the Cartesian structure, but we also see the so-called disorder of nature. And the two are in conflict. Can we marry them? I think it's a legitimate question. There are already architects who try to bring to architecture some of that, let's call it disorder of nature, although nature is not disordered, but it's a different kind of order. Nature is organized, but not with our system of organization, which is mainly, you know, Cartesian. That the scientists talk about nature in terms of a spontaneous order. I remember Lucian Blaga making a distinction between the Saxon village and the Romanian village. He said the Saxon village is ordered and the Romanian village is disordered. But he said what we call disorder is actually a different kind of order. So in the same way, we could say that what appears to be disordered in nature is actually a different kind of order. A more subtle, a more complex type of order. So maybe this attempt to unite plant and man is a positive one, but how can we do it? You know, it's still a question, but I do think it's important, very, very important, to try to recuperate nature as much as possible, even if this means that we renounce to some of our paradigms and some of our obsessions with excessive comfort. I mean, you know, Su Fujimoto, for example, talks about primitive futures. Well, in a way, what we look at here is some kind of a primitive future. And there are other architects who explore this theme. It's also connected with what we call a post-Anthropocene life. So, post-man. Man, if the human being still wants to live on the earth, it must redefine himself, herself, themselves, itself. The human society, it has to redefine itself. Now here, I found searching for all kinds of materials, this title on a website. It's alive. Architects are using living plants as structural building components. There are experiments in this sense where living plants become the structure of the building. I don't know if I have here examples for this, but as I was intrigued by this very wording. It's alive, meaning the building is alive because architects are using living plants as structural building components. And here there is a website where you can study yourselves the relationship between architecture and plants or horticulture in today's world. I think it's an interesting, not only interesting aesthetically, but also a vital issue for today. It's not enough to just build our buildings as we always did and then hang some plants on the facade. That's simply not sufficient. There are all kinds of projects that try to unite the world of plants with the world of architecture. Like in this project, I personally welcome the complexity of nature into the Cartesian structure of the human work. Hello, 1st of May. Today is the day of the workers, the day of work. But it's also the day when, that sweet Carl Linnaeus proposed that we finally name the plants. Maybe we should go back to a world, but I don't know if this is correct. Maybe it's not correct to go back to a world before the plants were named. Is it possible? But one thing is for sure, plants are beautiful. Leaves are beautiful. Flowers are beautiful. The grass is beautiful. The trees are beautiful. We need them badly. How can we negotiate between architecture and them? Maybe we could start building after we first do the garden. Usually we did a building, and then if we still had the time and interest and some money, we created a garden around the house. But what if we start differently? What if we start doing the garden first and then the building, if we are pressed indeed to build the building? To start with the garden, not to the house, and then maybe find a way to build the house in such a way that will be in some kind of a less disturbing relationship with the garden that we just made. There are all kinds of attempts. Some of them are dramatic, like here. Nature is still incarcerated here, but the structure itself has a certain drama that makes you think that it's organic, it's nature-like, and so on. But look at the building on the left, look at the buildings in the background, and look at this polyp, sculptural and also almost exasperated. you know, this kind of vegetal monster that is trying to escape actually the world of man. The world of man that is Cartesian, that is strict, that is rational, that is, you know, too assertive, I would say. And that world we need to problematize, and the way to do it, I will show in the second presentation. Right now, I just chose in a hurry some images that show an attempt to you know, maybe we could say to naturalize architecture. Heatherwick Studio, you know, Thomas Heatherwick, an important architect today, he designed in his studio this cancer center using the motif of potted plants. And apparently he received they received the approvals, and the building will start. So Heatherwick Studio, based out of London, is yet another practice that has turned to pottery for architectural inspiration, and have designed a building that speaks to the practical and emotional care Maggie's provides. Maggie's that's the cancer center. In contrast to the hospital, Maggie's needed to be a place that feels relaxed, informal, and domestic. The designers state plants seem to be a good fit. So you know, it's a different architecture because its priorities are different. At the same time as being a quiet domestic space for its users, on the inside there was an opportunity for the building's exterior to offer something positive and hopeful to people passing by. Surrounded by the huge and complex medical machine for healing, we wanted, that's what the architects say, we wanted to capture the positive and therapeutic experience of plants and see if it could be possible to make a whole building out of a garden. Interesting, just as an idea, to make the whole building out of a garden. We wondered if we could make a building from containers, each holding a piece of garden. The design formed itself as a collection of garden pots, defining a building by enclosing a series of spaces between them. The individual pots and planting are of different proportions, bringing the planting into and over the building itself. The most private spaces are created within the containers themselves. Between them are only the minimum flat sheets of glass necessary to weather, protect, and enclose the internal spaces. Now, for Thomas Heatherwick, this is not you know, a new attempt. He did it in other works, but this is one of his latest projects where he tries to animate the buildings with nature in this way, and it becomes almost like a rural fragment within an urban context. You see, even the way the landscape is done is done informally. Nature is allowed to manifest itself as freely as possible. And I think, you know, conceptually, if not in some other way, it is the correct approach to our desperate need for bringing back nature. There are other architects and important architects today who work in the same way, trying, as I said, almost desperately to recuperate what was lost. The interior is the interior, you know, the human being has needs, certain specific needs, is civilized, is clean, is comfortable, but you see through the glass the return of nature. And nature is climbing on the buildings and emerging from the buildings like plants from a pot, and it's all over the place. Architecture from living trees. Again, this is just a sketch of a possible more developed presentation, but I show some images that could provoke us to think differently, to understand that indeed is immensely important. In fact, it's vital if we are to diminish the effects of centuries of abuse that human beings, indulge themselves in relation with the earth. So much so that the climate is changing and pollution is high, and so on. All kinds of, so, these are some sketches of possible mediations or negotiations between man and nature. And, I mean, we look at this and we wonder, like with that kid there, what is this? This kind of, is it an architecture? It's not quite, or partially yes. It's organic, literally, not in the sense that, for example, Frank Lloyd Wright used the word organic. This is literally a return to nature. It is almost as if nature wants to become architecture. And it's in the process of accommodating itself to this thought. I don't know. I mean, there are all kinds of projects that try to sometimes to just mimic in a decorative way, some kind of a flower arrangement, structural or otherwise. But one thing is for sure, nature is having an exasperated return, and we have to facilitate this return if we are to survive on this earth. I mean, this flowering on top of concrete structures or wooden structures is an expression of this need to accommodate again in our life nature after we banished her. Now, is this a primitive future? I don't know. There is an architect in Italy, Andrea Branzi, whom I met in Orleans some years ago, and he advocates some kind of a desintoxication of nature. That is, for example, if you search for him, Andrea Branzi, Branzi, on Google Images, you'll see images of his projects where he's, showing a cow or several cows, and then laptops, people with laptops. So it's some kind of a, a return to nature and to the world of the, I mean, when I say nature, it's not just the plants, but also the world of the animals. And then on the other hand, having, the fruits, the products of the highest technology, some kind of a melange, some kind of a mixing together. But it's not easy to do this. Here again, we see, some kind of a pavilion that it's done almost by, in accordance, not in accordance, cooperating with nature. And gun is concrete, gun is steel and glass, and we see something else. We see, yes, the reassertion of the earth and of nature. And by the way of this, if you allow me, I will talk now about a very interesting architect, Marco Casagrande. I talked about him before, but I think it's very appropriate to take a look again at what he has to say in relation with this theme. Being the 1st of May, that is, the relationship between work, the work of man, which means production and consumption, and the world of nature, where finally in the 18th century the plants received names. Marco Casagrande is one of the most radical architects today, and he operates in Taiwan, but he was born in Finland from Italian parents. And let's read a little bit about him. That is, if my old laptop allows me to advance to the next slide. For example, this is what he says: designing is not sufficient. Design should not replace reality. The building must grow out of the location, it must react to its environment, it must be a reflection of life and also be itself, as every other living being. Architectural control goes against nature and thus also against architecture. This is very interesting. Let's read again. Architectural control goes against nature and thus also against itself, meaning against architecture. The built human environment is a mediator between human nature and nature itself. To be part of this, man must be weak. Well, architecture, by definition, in a way, is an expression of a strong man. So here is an architect who says, man must be weak. And I remember some good years ago, Peter Eisenman was talking about weak architecture and trying to practice it. So this is the man, Marco Casagrande. And as I said, I hope I have here some, I read about him, but let's first look at some pictures with Marco Casagrande, who does some very provocative and interesting things. As I said, his parents were Italian and he was born in Finland, but he works in Taiwan, but not only in Taiwan. So Marco Casagrande, who was actually born on May 7th, and I will talk again probably about him just 6 days from now, in 1971, is a Finnish architect, environmental artist, architectural theorist, former mercenary, writer and professor of architecture. He graduated from Helsinki University of Technology Department of Architecture. Interesting that former occupation, mercenary. I read some controversial things about that. Casagrande was born in Turku, Finland, to a well-off Finnish-Italian Catholic family. He spent his childhood in Litornio in Finnish Lapland, but went to school in Karis, a southern Finland small town, before moving to Helsinki to study architecture. His uncle, if I remember correctly, was rather established architect in Finland. Casagrande claimed that he volunteered. This is the controversy about him. Casagrande claimed that he volunteered for the Bosnian Croat Defense Forces in 1993 after his service in the Finnish army. He wrote under the pen name Luca Moconesi a controversial book, Mostar in, I'll read in English, Hitchhikers on the Road to Mostar, about his alleged experiences in the Bosnian Civil War. And based on descriptions of war crimes committed by the main character in the autobiographical book, he came under suspicion as a possible war criminal. The war crimes listed in the book include the murder of a civilian woman in her home and plotting to destroy a dam to flood a village with civilian inhabitants. After coming under suspicion, he claimed that the book was in fact a work of fiction. Later, Casagrande has expressed views condemning war crimes from a military perspective. Those troops know that they are doing wrong. This is the very opposite of constructive collectivity and group spirit. Anybody can understand that it is by no measures militarily efficient to go kicking the doors of all people's home. Casagrande has been lecturing in the National Defense University of Finland since 2006 and on courses of strategy and leadership. A strange biography, no? I don't know enough about him, but beyond this controversy and this aspect, which is not to be ignored, I'm very interested in what he is doing now in the field of architecture, which interests us. But this does not mean in any way that we should divorce the issue of architecture from the other aspects of his life. The theory of the third generation city views, he promoted this idea, the third generation city, views the post-industrial urban condition as a machine ruined by nature, including human nature, and architects as design shamans, merely interpreting what the bigger nature of the shared mind is transmitting. This organic machine is kept alive through continuous and spontaneous ruining processes performed by citizens, to whom Casagrande referred to as anarchist gardeners. I like this, anarchist gardeners. How could a gardener be an anarchist? But a gardener could be an anarchist when he's active, when he's acting in the field of the asphalt, in the field of concrete, in the field of the mega city, where he tries to bring back nature which was banished from. So by means of urban farming, illegal architecture, and urban acupuncture, I also like this naming, this idea, this concept, if you want to use this rather questionable word, concept, urban acupuncture. This is very interesting. I myself, without knowing of Marco Casagrande, many years ago, I was thinking of something very similar, of applying acupuncture to a landscape in order to build something. The element of ruin is viewed as something man-made, having become part of nature. The theory is developed in the independent multidisciplinary research center Ruin Academy, which he created in 2010. Taipei organic acupuncture. These are drawings by, you are going to see drawings by Mario Casagrande. He always works, funnily, talking about the dichotomy between red and green. His drawings are full of red, but he's actually building green. And, we can talk about this, about the dichotomy between red and green, about dichotomy between fire and plant. Landscape on display. Let's read a little bit about this. Landscape, an architectural installation by Finnish architects Casagrande and Ritala, with Marco Casagrande and Sami Rintala in a former field in Savonlinna. The work is commenting on the desertion process of the Finnish countryside. 3 of these abandoned barns were driven, the architects explained, to the point where they have had to break their primeval union with the soil. Desolate, they have risen on their shanks and are swaying towards the cities of the south. The work was awarded in the Architectural Review's Emerging Architecture 1999 competition and selected to the Venice Biennial in 2000. Landscape launched the international career of Casagrande and Rintala. The artwork was set on fire by the authors in October 1999. Landscape represented Finland in the new trends of architecture in Europe and Japan in 2001 exhibition. And here we see these, deteriorated huts on legs, which they put to fire not much later. It's a critical commentary on the fragility of even human work that becomes extinct and becomes very fragile, very, very vulnerable, and it's kind of, in a way, it's the opposite of the organic architecture of Frank Lloyd Wright, whose buildings grew from the earth And here we see the hut on these, linear legs, ready to move. And they burn them in the night. Burning of Landscape, 1999. Now, what is the meaning of this? Well, the meaning of this might be that, it has several layers. I think it's a critical statement about the exile in which the rurality finds itself, the exile of a certain type of architecture, in this case, these modest huts, the banishment of such models of building by the big city. And so burning them would be in a way, the natural conclusion, or the natural apotheosis of this process of estrangement and banishment of a certain kind of being on this earth. Casagrande and Rintale, Red Room 2003, Red Room is murder backwards. The designers intended to comment on the connection of oil, war, and environment. And is an architectonic architectonic installation in Anchorage in Alaska by Casagrande and Rintala. The work was commissioned by Alaska Design Forum. 3 Alaska Railroad oil tanks cut into total 12 pieces and turned into a temple structure opposite the federal building of Anchorage in the crossing of C Street and 7th Avenue. The interior is painted bright red in contrast to the rusty and brutal exterior. The floor is made of 3,500 kilograms of oyster shells, the origin of all Alaskan oil. And the typical Casagrande work. Don't worry, a little bit later we are going to arrive at some very green architecture, even if his drawings continue to be with red, white, and black. And this is the manifest work which was protesting against the oil industry. And I think it's the role of the artist, it's the role of the architect to protest when there is something to protest. And there is plenty of reason to protest all over the world against the madness of consumption, the madness of abusing the earth, the madness of oil, the madness of running on the highways with our cars and cars again. So they built here, an installation that is trying to protest something that they thought should become a transparent issue and discussed. The interior, as you can see, it's itself demoralizing and sad. Now the oysters, and then the fascination with oil, and then the redness of crime, because it is a crime. Interesting work also, and this work underlines my belief that the architect should be also militant. Yes, a militant architecture is needed wherever is possible. And this is an installation, but even as an installation, it is important. It makes you think. Now, Potemkin, also by them, Casagrande and Ritala, 2003. Here I didn't quite understand what they were doing. Potemkin refers to the Potemkin facades that in Russia, and not only Russia, meant a fake facade, that behind the facade lied a different reality. Apparently, it comes from the name from a Russian officer who tried to impress the Queen of Russia, who was traveling by train and towards the railways. he built these Potemkin facades, fake facades, showing, the glory of human work. Hello, 1st of May. And, it was delusional because behind it, it was the miserable reality. But the Potemkin facade expressed something else. Now, I don't know what this is. Is this a reference to the Barcelona pavilion by Miss? Maybe the 60-minute man. I don't know what this is either. Particularly this period in the work of Mario Casagrande is mysterious to me, but we'll arrive very soon to some works which I'm more knowledgeable. The Floating Sauna from 2002, and the drawing with lots of red, as he likes to make drawings. Treasure Hill 2000, and now we arrive at urban acupuncture through creativity, biourbanism, a formerly illegal settlement of urban farmers in Taipei, Taiwan. After participatory planning action between Casagrande Laboratory, local NGOs, non-governmental organizations, Treasure Hill community, and Taipei city government, the area has been restored into a model community of environmentally sustainable urban living in Taiwan, a must-see location by the New York Times. This is again, the drawing of Casagrande. This was how the existing buildings looked like, and he tried to recuperate them with very modest means. So Treasure Hill is a matriarchal settlement commanded by grandmother Mrs. Chen, by a grandmother. The community consists of old KMT veterans, illegal foreign workers, and artists. Treasure Hill is a no man's land dominated by people and the jungle. Treasure Hill is a simultaneous ruin and the construction site. This is the third generation city. He continuously talks about the third generation city. The legitimation and restoration process 2003-2010 of Treasure Hill is now completed. Some of the old community has moved back and some have moved away. Now the next step is to inject new blood into the hill. The organism is ready and willing to live. Mrs. Chen is still in charge, the grandmother. Casagrande Laboratory in participatory planning with the Treasure Hill community, local NGOs, and Taipei city government. You see, architect and constructor, he often works like this. He does the project, but he also builds it. And we are going to see images of this experiment where it's more than an experiment. It's bringing back to life ruined complex of buildings. Vegetation, the plants are abundantly allowed to, take over, and that's a good thing, I think. And slowly, with small interventions, a staircase, a balcony, artists are moving in, illegal workers, and so on. It's like a small victory over death, transgressing the ruin and bringing it back to life. And this restorative effort, I think it's noble and worthy of being done. You see, small interventions, these steps towards this level, nothing grandiose, done by the architect himself and his helpers. Small interventions that infuse new life. And in this sense, I think this is green architecture, green in a deeper sense, not necessarily because, having plants climb the facades, although you saw nature is also allowed to freely, assert herself. But it's green in the sense that it's sustainable, it's ecological, it's done with reused materials, most of it, and with very little money. So it's an attempt to bring spring to architecture and to life itself. Now, the Chen house from 2008 is a house that he realized on an old Japanese cherry farm in the Datun Mountains of North Taiwan. It is designed as a vessel to react on the demanding wind, flooding, and heat conditions on the site. This is the house. This is not so unusual in terms of its architecture. But I think it's well done, again, with rather simple means. I mean, yes, with some wood, but the house is a stick raised above the ground in order to let the flood waters run under it. The different spaces are connected to a flexible movement within the axis of outdoor and indoor functions. The smaller bathroom and kitchen unit act as a kicker, stabilizing the wooden structure during the frequent typhoons and earthquakes. The bioclimatic architecture is designed to catch the cool breeze from the Datun River during the hot days and to let in the small winds circulating on the site between the freshwater reservoir pond and the farmlands. A fireplace is used during the winter for heating and for cooking tea. In connection with the bathroom is a small sauna. The house is not strong or heavy, it is weak and flexible. It is also not closing the environment out, but designed to give the farmers a needed shelter. I like this building. I like this building, and it's not so modest as as its author might claim, but it's not aggressive either. It's not. It's a building that has a modern sensitivity, but being that is done with this lumber all over, the structure of the building, the furniture, everything is done with lumber. Uh, I think it's a valid proposal for our times, and the inhabitants seem to enjoy themselves inside this house, if they are indeed farmers. Maybe they are the kids of the farmers, I don't know. The truth of the matter is, I don't think human beings really need a lot in order to be happy on this earth. We can live modestly, but with less negative consequences on or effects on nature. It's almost like a little, well, not so little, but a medium-sized wooden fortress here in this landscape. Casagrande. Now, it's funny that he talks about weak architecture, but his name is Casagrande, which we know what it means. You can have a weak Casagrande. And maybe nomen est omen, the name is destiny. So, paradoxes. Anyway, Bug Dome, 2009. Now we are truly moving into that weak architecture that he was advocating. Now look at the urban development, so to speak, in the background and the bug dome that he built. So inspired by insects, the bug dome is a small sheltered area used during the Shenzhen, I don't know, I always have troubles to pronounce the name of this Chinese city, biennial for underground bands, poetry, reading, and discussions. And after the biennial as an unofficial gathering place for illegal workers from the Chinese countryside. Built on a wasteland of a ruined building site in between the Shenzhen City Hall and an illegal workers' camp, the structure is intended to reveal the connection we share with nature. In large scale, if we learn to understand the connection, what the hundreds of millions of hands that are now migrating from the rural China to the modern cities might bring along them, we might be able to ruin the industrial city. This is what he is attempting, to ruin the industrial city. We might be able to make the city to be part of nature. The design process was painful. We were all reaping the design to all three individual directions, but in the end we gave up and the design became the boss and we learned to listen. Architecture gives the commands and architects listen, explained Casagrande. The building is made of bamboo and was adapted to meet the site-specific conditions. Inside the cocoon, a weak retreat for the modern man to escape from the strength of the exploding urbanism. A small area allows people to come together and the space to share a fire is also provided. And this was an initial sketch. This is what they built of bamboo. It's indeed a weak architecture that is woven and that is so fragile compared to, the concrete structures behind. And now you see it on the right, literally green. Now, I don't know where Casagrande lives, but it's very possible he lives in one of those towers behind and not in the green bug dome that he built right here. But as a statement, as a manifesto, I think it works. And here they are, Casagrande with his collaborators. Sandworm, very similar to this work that we just saw from 2012. Sandworm is an organic structure space creature realized on the dunes of that coastline in Belgium. The 45 meters long and 10 meters wide and high installation moves freely in between architecture and environmental art and is constructed entirely out of willow, following the local knowledge of a continuing interaction between work and environment. Or should we say between the 1st of May of workers and the 1st of May of the plants. Casagrande worked hard with his team of young architects and local experts for 4 weeks in order to create something that he describes as weak architecture, a human-made structure that wishes to become part of nature through flexibility and organic presence. And here it is. In Belgium. The visitors are describing the sandworm as a willow cathedral, finely tuned to celebrate the site-specific conditions of that beach. The space is used for picnics, relaxation, and post-industrial meditation. Inside the sandworm, you are greeted by a natural spectacle of light and shadow. I was amazed how you can create such beauty with such simple natural materials. The artist believes that architectural control goes against nature, and it's true, and thus also against architecture. The built human environment is a mediator between human nature and nature itself. To be part of this, men must be weak. To the Finnish artist Marco Casagrande, designing is not sufficient. Design should not replace reality. The building must grow out of the location, it must react to its environment, it must be a reflection of life, and also be itself as every other living being. This person wrote, Peter Bayer. And you see it in the background, this pavilion that they built with the willow. One thing is for sure, when this structure falls to the ground, it returns to the earth. It doesn't insult the earth. It doesn't pollute. It doesn't create, an unbearably heavy, heavy. I don't know how to call it. This incredible damage that we do to the earth with our artifacts in concrete and all kinds of heavy structures, that when they become ruins, we don't know how to get rid of them. This one returns to the earth. It is from the earth, returns to the earth, and as such is not contributing to pollution, is not contributing to the climate change and so on. Now, can we live in something like this? With some difficulty, perhaps, but for thought and for a temporary, visit is probably okay. But it is, yes, a weak architecture, an embroidered architecture, woven indeed. And some nice pictures can be taken of it. Of course, in terms of functionalism is questionable, but now his drawings are not so green, and not just because he uses red and black and white, but I see a certain anxiety in his drawings. And again, it's interesting that this man who advocates a weak architecture, well, to an extent, the green architecture is actually using red a lot. Now, the Ruin Academy, which is probably the most radical architecture school in the world, and he founded it, the Ruin Academy is an independent crossover architectural research center in the urban core area of Taipei, Taiwan. The academy is run in cooperation between the Finland-based Casagrande Laboratory and Taiwanese JUT Foundation for Arts and Architecture. Ruin Academy is set to rethink the industrial city and the modern man in a box. It organizes workshops and courses for various Taiwanese and international universities, including the National Taiwan University Department of Sociology, Tam Kang University Department of Architecture, Aalto University Sustainable Global Technologies Center, and Helsinki University of Arts and Design Department of Environmental Art. The research and design tasks move freely in between architecture, urban design, environmental art, and other disciplines of art and science within the general framework of built human environment. The Ruin Academy occupies an abandoned five-story apartment building in central Taipei. All the interior walls of the building and all the windows are removed in order to grow bamboo and vegetables inside the house. The professors and students are sleeping and working in mahogany-made ad hoc dormitories and have a public sauna on the fifth floor. All the building is penetrated with 6 inches holes in order to let rain inside. Very unconventional, no? The academy is viewed as an example or fragment of the third generation city, the organic ruin of the industrial city. Without his ruins, man is just a common ape, he thinks. And these are his drawings again. There are these penetrations in the slabs and in the walls, so the rain goes actually inside the building. He intended this to happen. The Ruin Academy locates in Taipei in an abandoned apartment block turned into a compost of the modern city. Compost as the future topsoil. And this is the interior of the Ruin Academy. Well, they had mahogany wood, to build these couchettes, these, alcoves where people can sleep. The Ruin Academy does not rely on design, but hooks on to the local knowledge of the Taipei Basin and reacts on this. Design should not, I read this before, I'm not reading it again. Here the students, warming themselves up because with so many holes in the walls and you see on the slabs, it's probably not very warm in the building. The Ruin Academy operates with Taipei as the urban case study and with various smaller projects in Taiwan in order to determine the elements of the third generation city. Our students operators are not volunteers, they are called constructor gardeners. We want to farm a city and treat it with urban acupuncture, tuning the city towards the organic. Taipei is a no man's land being dominated by the official industrialism and the anarchy of the jungle. Ruin Academy joins the urban farmers. In grandmothers we trust. I like very much this phrase, in grandmothers we trust. The Ruin Academy occupies an abandoned 5-story apartment building. The academy is a constantly changing mixture of a ruin and the construction site. They have a sauna, so not everything is bad there. I'm not going to read all this long text. Other images of the Ruin Academy. You see the holes in the walls and in the horizontal slabs. I don't know how the winters are in Taipei, and but they have fire within the building. You see, they brought the plants inside the building as well. A most unusual architecture school. They have concerts there, as you can see. So it's not just about architecture, it's not just about the design, it's about a different modus vivendi, another way of living. Maybe not so comfortable, but who knows? Maybe the qualities of this experiment cannot be approximated from afar. You have to experience the place there to understand if it works or if it doesn't. This is a first location. He built another one in an abandoned industrial building, and I hope I have images of that too. This is how the building looks towards the street. Fire and plants, fire and plants, fire and plants, and the plants are also red. The red vegetation of Marco Casagrande. He has a vision. Now, if this vision is valid or not, time will tell. But he does have a vision. Coherently, developed. Now we look at a forest temple, which I think is very well done. A forest temple is a result of the constructive shamanism workshop in Lithuania in 2016. A multidisciplinary tribe of artists, artisans, architects, writers, photographers, yogis, and children of forest gathered in the ancient lands of Uridi to perform architectural rituals connecting the modern man with nature. And this is how they built it, using the trees as structure, and then they just with the ropes they created the space that they intended to have. And I think it's very successful, and it's not in any way damaging nature. And yet the act of man is to be seen and appreciated. And it's built with rigor, even with beauty. No, it's done with just with ropes, without cutting down anything. And in this sense, yes, it's a green, it's a weak temple, but weak in a paradoxical way, because on the other hand, it's actually very inspiring, I think, and strong. I mean, think about the Parthenon and think of this. And this is done just with rope. And yes, with some work. But it's a different time we live in. And I think such an attitude is a positive one. The Forest Temple by Marco Casagrande. And here we see a ceremony taking place. And the builders. Taitung Ruin Academy. This is the second location where they have the Ruin Academy from 2014. It's set up in an abandoned Japanese-Taiwanese sugar factory. And Taiwan, in order to take further the biourbanist research of the third generation city. The core of the Ruin Academy is located in the evaporator tanks area of the factory, from where it will gradually grow to occupy the whole sugar factory. The core offers multifunctional research and educational spaces for Ruin Academy workshops and studios, backed up by extensive community gardening and wild nature inside the factory. And here is the so-called conceptual drawing with his preferred graphics. The roof above the gardens has been removed in selective points in order to let rain inside. A theme for him to let the rain inside. Additionally, the existing roofs and rainwater channels are being used for harvesting rainwater into water tanks for irrigation. All the floors are covered by wood or earth. One can walk barefoot inside the organic machine. The Taitung Ruin Academy is focused in the research of the local knowledge of the indigenous Formosan tribes in the Taitung County area, and transforming this organic knowledge into design methodologies of biourbanism, ecological restoration of existing cities. The indigenous communities are still living in a continuous close connection with nature and are resisting the industrial control of the modern man. This biological connection of man and nature will be reintroduced to the industrial city as a decisive step towards the third generation city, the organic ruin of the industrial city, an organic machine. Ruin is when man-made has become part of nature. Interesting, this thought. Ruin is when man-made has become part of nature. Whatever made by man returns to nature. And here are images from this interesting environment. And I like this dialectical tension between, industrial fragments and the return of nature. Quite an engaging school, if we are to call it a school. But they are supported by various institutions, otherwise they couldn't do this. Plus, the building was donated to them and so on. So, I also see here an effort to bring back the contemplative life, something that our, so-called progress banished. So, to bring back the shaman, to bring back the monk, to bring back the reflective mind of the human being, who sits on a bench and looks at the fire and the fume and thinks and feels without producing anything. But thoughts and feelings, and the dancer around the fire, and the plants near the machines. Plenty of machines, rusted or not, with plants all around them. And then the sketches of Marco Casagrande with lots of red, the red of fire and the red of plants. Two kinds of red or redness. That's it. So let's talk a little bit.